The champagne bubbles caught the light like tiny fireworks, glittering under the office ceiling as applause filled the room. People laughed, glasses clinked, and someone turned the music up just a little louder, as if volume alone could drown out reality. Our project had just crossed $40 million in quarterly revenue. $40 million. A system built from nothing. A system I had designed, coded, debugged, rebuilt, and protected for 5 straight years. And yet, as the promotion announcements rolled out, my name never came up. Instead, the applause swelled for a man who had joined the project 6 weeks before launch. In that moment, standing there with a glass of champagne that tasted faintly stale, a single thought crystallized in my mind. If your life's work can be erased with a pen stroke, what happens when you're the one holding the eraser? My name is Rachel Whitman. I was 32 years old, the youngest senior data engineer at Nexus Technologies, though you would never have guessed it from the way I was treated that night. The conference room buzzed with self-congratulation as Mark Reynolds, our department head, stood at the podium delivering a well-rehearsed speech about collaboration, leadership, and team synergy. I watched from the back corner, invisible in my own triumph, as the dashboard lit up behind him. My dashboard. The one I had built during 300 sleepless nights, stitched together with caffeine, code, and a level of obsession no one else in that room could match. Real-time graphs pulsed on the screen, showing exactly how my algorithms were driving the revenue everyone was celebrating. And special recognition goes to Brad Thompson, Mark announced, lifting his glass toward a man who looked mildly surprised by his own success. His leadership truly drove this achievement. Leadership. Brad's main contribution had been scheduling meetings and forwarding my reports with his name added to the email thread. My phone buzzed in my hand. A Slack message from Sarah, the only other woman on the team. This is a joke, right? Everyone knows this is your work. I didn't reply. I just watched Brad smile and nod, soaking in praise that felt like it had been siphoned directly from my bloodstream. When the applause faded, I walked down the hallway toward Mark's office. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly, illuminating motivational posters about excellence and integrity that now felt almost mocking. "Rachel, come in," Mark said without looking up from his laptop. His office smelled like leather and expensive cologne, the kind that tried very hard to announce authority. "I know what you're going to say," he added, finally glancing up with a familiar, patronizing smile. "You do?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. 5 years in corporate tech had taught me an important lesson. Emotional women don't get promoted. They get managed out. "Look," he said, leaning back in his chair, hands folded behind his head. "You're brilliant. Nobody disputes that. But Brad has presence. Executive presence. The board responds to that." He spoke as if this were an immutable law of physics. "Company policy dictates that leadership roles go to people who can represent us at the highest levels. You understand. Company policy. The same excuse they'd used last year, and the year before that." "I built the entire system," I replied carefully. "The patents have my name on them. The architecture, the pipelines, the client presentations. When Brad was unavailable, I covered everything." Mark's tone hardened. "And you've been compensated fairly for your technical contributions. Your bonus will reflect that. But leadership requires more than technical skill. More than technical skill. More than working until 3 a.m. fixing critical failures. More than preventing a data breach that would have cost millions. More than being the only person who truly understood how Nexus's entire data infrastructure worked." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "I see," I said. "Thank you for clarifying." "Rachel," Mark called as I reached the door. "You're valuable here. Don't do anything rash." I turned back and smiled. Not the eager, accommodating smile I'd worn for years, but something colder, more deliberate. "Of course not," I said. "I'm nothing if not calculated. Back at my desk, I opened a folder on my personal drive labeled insurance. Inside was a scanned contract from 3 years earlier, from the night Nexus had nearly outsourced our entire department. I'd negotiated the enterprise software license with our primary vendor back then, slipping in a clause that looked harmless, almost boring. A single paragraph stating that the license remained valid only while the lead data engineer, Rachel Whitman, remained an active, recognized employee in good standing, with full acknowledgement of her role. They'd signed it without reading the fine print. After all, I was just a technical resource. Not someone who understood legal leverage. Across the office, Brad held court near the break room, explaining his system to junior developers. Mark was already on another call, likely relaying the success story upstairs. Everyone was riding high on a victory built on my unpaid nights and invisible labor. They had no idea what was coming. The beauty of being underestimated is that no one notices you planting the seeds of their destruction. And I had been planting mine for 3 years. That night, in my apartment, I sat alone with my laptop open, the city lights flickering outside the window. The contract glowed on my screen, every clause familiar, every word intentional. My mind drifted back to the emergency meeting 3 years earlier, the CFO sliding a termination timeline across the table. "It's nothing personal," he'd said. "The numbers don't lie." Everything in their world was numbers, except when it came to recognizing who actually generated them. I'd spent that night dissecting vendor agreements, hunting for leverage, for something that would make me impossible to erase. That's when I found it. The software license powering our analytics platform was up for renewal. I'd built a relationship with the vendor's CEO over years of late-night troubleshooting and feature feedback. He trusted me, not Nexus. When I suggested the clause, framed as a security measure, he'd laughed and agreed. The language I drafted was precise, wrapped in technical jargon, specifying that any change to my role, title, or recognition would trigger an immediate license review. Legal skimmed it. Mark approved it. Everyone focused on the cost savings I'd negotiated, blind to the trap hidden in subsection 12. Over the next 3 years, I made sure everything ran through that platform. Every pipeline, every dashboard, every executive report. When alternatives were suggested, I had logical reasons to dismiss them. When dependency concerns were raised, I showed performance gains and savings. No one questioned the quiet woman who made everything work. They just saw results. Now, staring at the screen in my dark apartment, I opened a new email draft to the vendor. Subject line, License Compliance Review. I didn't send it. Not yet. Timing matters. And soon, timing would be on my side. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise, the way I always had when something mattered. The floor was empty, the air still, humming with that quiet tension that only exists before a storm. I logged in, not to work, but to observe. Within hours of Brad's promotion announcement, the first cracks began to show. Jake from infrastructure, one of the few engineers who actually read documentation, pulled up the vendor agreement on his screen. I saw his posture change, his shoulders stiffen, his eyes narrow as he scrolled. He cross-checked the org chart. Then the contract again. That was the moment it clicked. By lunchtime, whispers moved through the engineering floor like static electricity. Subtle, cautious, terrified whispers. A clause. A name. My name. By mid-afternoon, Mark's office door slammed shut. Through the glass, I watched legal documents spread across his desk like a crime scene. Brad, meanwhile, was in a conference room delivering a technical leadership session, confidently misusing terms he barely understood. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so expensive. My phone buzzed again. Sarah. Did you plan this? I typed back slowly. I planned for being disposable. Everything else was just math. The email I sent to legal that evening was deliberately boring. No threats. No emotion. Just a professional notice highlighting a potential compliance inconsistency under Section 12, subsection 4 of our enterprise license. That was it. By the next morning, panic arrived early. The infrastructure team was in by 7. Legal by 8. HR by 9. By 10, the CFO had cancelled every meeting on his calendar. At 11:45, an external consultant showed up in heels sharp enough to puncture morale. And Brad, finally sensing something was wrong, wandered the floor demanding updates no one was obligated to give him. At 2 p.m., Mark called me into his office. This time, he didn't smile. "You know what you've done," he said. "I ensured continuity of our critical systems," I replied evenly. "You created a hostage situation." "No," I said. "I created accountability." The consultant leaned forward. "Ms. Whitman, this could be interpreted as sabotage." I met her gaze. "Or as enforcing a contract your company signed and violated." Silence followed. The kind that lands heavy, final. "What do you want?" Mark asked. "Recognition," I said. "The role I earned. Compensation that reflects the revenue I generate. And removal from supervision by people who don't understand what they manage." 48 hours, I told them. That's how long until the license validation failed completely. The collapse began before dawn on Wednesday. At 6:07, my system monitor pinged. "License validation warning." At 6:23, the dashboards went dark. No gradual failure. Just absence. The office erupted. Customer data inaccessible. Sales pipelines empty. Security systems offline. Even the elevators froze because the building ran on the same platform. I arrived calmly, walking up the stairs while executives panicked behind glass walls. Engineers looked at me like someone who had just walked out of a burning building without a scratch. Then my phone rang. The vendor CEO. I answered on speaker. "Rachel," he said warmly, "we have a compliance issue." "We do," I agreed. He explained, politely and publicly, that services would remain suspended until the named lead engineer was restored to her recognized position. The CEO tried to intervene. The vendor declined. "I only ever dealt with Rachel," he said. "As far as we're concerned, she is your infrastructure." By evening, the damage was undeniable. Clients gone. Regulators circling. Stock sliding. At 8:43 p.m., the CEO finally called me directly. His voice was quiet now. Tired. "What's it going to take?" Vice President of Data Architecture. Direct report. Executive compensation. Equity tied to revenue. Immediate termination of Brad. Removal of Mark from any technical oversight. Silence. Negotiation. Then acceptance. The board signed that night. By midnight, the announcement went out. By 6 a.m., I restored the systems. My first day as vice president felt surreal. The same building, the same people, but suddenly my name carried weight. I addressed the engineering team directly. What happened wasn't revenge, I told them. It was correction. From now on, credit follows contribution. Code doesn't lie. Logs don't lie. If you build it, you own it. Applause followed. Real applause. Not performative. Earned. 6 months later, Nexus was stronger than ever. Revenue up. Systems resilient. Culture corrected. When the CEO asked how I'd done it, I told him the truth. I stopped asking to be valued and made it non-negotiable. Some people call it revenge. I call it survival with documentation. And that's the lesson. The person who builds your empire should never be treated like furniture. Because one day, they might remind you who's really holding the keys. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated at work, and if so, what would you have done differently? Let's talk about it.